the television ministry of First Community Church. My name is Glenn Miles. I'm the senior minister here in this congregation, and we're thrilled that you've joined us for this time of worship together. Today's service is a little bit different. We've titled it, A Service of Lament and Hope. Our congregation was shocked, as I'm sure you were as well, by the terrible events in Texas and those before in New York, the horrific shooting. It was ugly and awful to hear about. We felt it would be important to gather and design all of our music, our meditations, prayers, and the sermon to be focused on how we can overcome these events and what we can do next. Indeed, we'll begin with laments and end with a word of hope. Here's a little clip for you just before we hear from our friend Nikita. Are we doing everything we can to help our children survive and thrive? Those are the words of Parker Palmer, a well-known author and educator, a man who spoke here at First Community a few years ago. He is a kind and gentle soul. We must bear witness to truths that may lose us friends, such as the fact that keeping children safe at school will not be achieved by making more guns available to more people. That way lies madness. That way lies madness. We have to start with loving our neighbor. We have to start with working on this problem. We can no longer wait. We have to organize now. We have to fight now. We have to roll up our sleeves and get after the task of ending the scourge, the disgusting, violent scourge of gun violence. I've been dogged by a simple but important question. Are we doing everything we can to help our children survive and thrive? Those are the words of Parker Palmer, a well-known author and educator, a man who spoke here at First Community a few years ago. He is a kind and gentle soul. He asked that question following a massacre at an elementary school. And he said, clearly, the answer is no. What makes his question and his answer more powerful and more poignant is the fact that he wrote those words 10 years ago after Sandy Hook and the murders that occurred there in a kindergarten classroom. Are we doing all we can to help our children survive and thrive? He goes on. Let's put this up on the screen so you can see it. We must bear witness to truths that may lose us friends, such as the fact that keeping children safe at school will not be achieved by making more guns available to more people. That way lies madness. That way lies madness. Consider this. The United States makes up 4.4% of the world's population. We have 42% of the world's guns. Do you feel safer today than you did 10 years ago? Do you feel safer today than you did 23 years ago after Columbine? Do you feel safer today? More guns. That way lies madness. Jesus was clear on the night that he was arrested, on the night that he would be taken away and tortured, on the night before the day he would be taken away and executed by the state. He was very clear. As the arresting party came to take him away, one of his disciples pulled out a sword and cut off the ear of a slave who was part of the arresting party. Jesus stopped him and said to the disciple, "Live by the sword, and you will die by the sword." It's not very complex. It's not very difficult to understand. You don't have to go to seminary. I understood it when I was 10 years old in Sunday school. If you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. It's impossible to hear the Sermon on the Mount, part of which we heard today, and somehow come to the conclusion that I need to go out and buy an AR-15 rifle. I saw a quote this morning from a pediatrician. She said that the bullet of an AR-15, when it hits a small child who's not been fully developed yet, it will tear a hole in that child's body 6 inches wide. I know. It's a horrific image on a Sunday morning. It's a difficult truth to bear. There are some followers of Jesus in the United States of America who are unbelievably confused about the teachings of the one that I've named my Lord and Savior since I was 10 years old. One of the most disgusting things about the insurrection on January 6th in 2021 was the sight of the cross of Jesus Christ, the symbol of our faith, being taken along with the violence that went to the Capitol. Taken along with a hangman's noose. That is the height of blasphemy. That is exactly what it means to take the Lord's name in vain. It's not about swearing. It's not about don't use God's name as a swear word. I'm tempted to, frankly. But that's not what it's about. To say you were a follower of Jesus and then commit an act of violence is taking the Lord's name in vain. This applies to the issue that is before us today, because this violence is taking over our society. It's harming our children. It's harming our grandmothers. It's harming our psyches, our souls, our collective sense of what it means to be an American. Too many are saying ridiculous things like, I believe in Jesus and guns. You can't. You can't. It's time for us to pay attention to the teachings of Jesus. It's time to take him seriously, to listen again and again and again until we finally understand what he's saying to us. There's a sweet scene in one of the Gospels. It's a precious one. Parents are bringing their children to Jesus for a blessing, much like children do here when we baptize them here or at First Community South. They're bringing him to their children, and they want him to lay his hand on their heads and offer them a blessing. But the disciples of Christ, they've got important things to do. No, parents, please. This is Jesus. We're like his best friends. You need to step back, step away. And Jesus says, stop that. Bring the children to me. In another place in Scripture, he says, anyone who welcomes this little child welcomes me. At the heart of Jesus' teaching is this simple instruction to welcome children, to bless them, to protect them, to keep them safe, to give them a roof over their head, food on their table, and love in your heart. Mr. Palmer's right. We're not doing everything we can to help our children thrive, let alone survive. 321 people are shot every day in the United States of America. Since January 1, there have been 213 mass shootings this year. One of them occurred just a couple of blocks down the street from where my mom lives, in a church in Laguna Woods. This violence affects every one of us. It expands out like a ring after a rock's been tossed into a pond. It just expands and expands and expands. It's impossible to get away from it on the news. It's impossible to get away from it in conversations. But it's more than just the statistics. The fact is, these shootings destroy families. It ruins communities. How large is Uvalde, Texas? 15,000, 20,000? Every single one of those persons woke up this morning in fear, in dread, in worry, traumatized, angry, filled with rage. I saw several parents from Sandy Hook reliving the nightmare that they'd experienced when their own child's lives were taken. 10 years later, the nightmare hasn't gone away. I've seen many social media posts, as Mary Kate's prayer this morning indicated, of parents worried sick as they dropped off their children. There's people in this room right now who've said to me, I cried every day this week when I dropped off my child. The trauma is taking over our world. It's taking over our society. It's taking over our culture. There are 49 million school children. How traumatized are they to have to go through active shooter training? They don't even have the words. Many of them are too young to have the words to express what they're feeling. How many teachers are overwhelmed and traumatized by considering the fact that they have to be more than just a teacher? They have to be a shield, a protector. If you don't think active shooter training if you don't think it's traumatizing, take one. We've done 2 of them here with our staff. The first time we did it, it was overwhelming. It was unbelievable. The first 30 minutes were not what I was expecting. I thought it would be statistics and reports and how to protect yourself. I won't even describe it. I got complaints from a few members of the staff. Didn't know that was coming. This isn't fair. This is traumatizing. I didn't blame them for complaining to me. I was traumatized as well. The sheriff, a woman, said to us, though, I know this is upsetting. I know this is bothering. I know it's worrying. But we do this so that you can see and experience, at least in a small way, so that your mind, because your body won't go where your mind hasn't been. It's overwhelming to think what it's doing to our culture. Now imagine what a child feels when she wakes up the morning after a shooting. Imagine what a child feels when he gets on the bus and says goodbye to his mom. Imagine what they feel when they arrive at school and there are armed guards outside a place that they thought was safe before. The damage being done to our children goes beyond the statistics. It's overwhelming. If you're not angry, frankly, you're not paying attention. We need more than anger and rage, though. To try to carry those feelings is exhausting. And because it's exhausting, we have to focus and find somewhere else to stand. We cannot give up. We cannot be overwhelmed with despair. We must rekindle hope. And in my experience as a pastor, in my experience as a human being, hope is always strongest when the seed for it is planted in a foundation, in a soil that is rich in love. Jesus' teaching is clear. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's at the heart, at the center, the very center of our faith. It's at the center of Judaism. It's at the center of Islam. It's at the center of virtually every religion in the world. Love your neighbor as yourself. My friend Greg is a member of our church. He sent me an article yesterday from the Christian Science Monitor. The title was, "What Do We Do Now?" For 2 or 3 pages, and yes, I'm so old school, I have to print out the internet, I'm sorry. For 2 or 3 pages, he laments, he names his despair. What do we do now? Finally, he says, what do? We get to know our neighbors. We put into practice the teaching of Jesus to love our neighbor as ourself. The author writes, it starts with our neighbors. It has to. That's where it begins. Now I know this is a complex situation. I'm not trying to oversimplify it. I'm not trying to pretend as though there aren't a variety of forces at work here. But hope is grounded, rooted in love. My friend Adam is a pastor in Kansas City. He sent me an article yesterday from the Washington Post about the shooter in Uvalde, Texas. He was bullied horribly as a child. He spoke with a lisp and a stutter, and he was made fun of most likely every single day of his young life. In middle school, it got worse. In high school, when he got onto social media and got involved in gaming as a way to escape, as a way to get rid of all that, the bullying continued, and it became much more intense. In fact, he posted a photo of himself with eyeliner on, and all that brought was derogatory words for what it means to be gay. Adam wonders, I wonder, what would have happened if somewhere in that boy's young life the light of Christ could have shined? What would have happened if in that young boy's life, if love could have been made real? Again, I understand there are complex forces at work here. There are difficult things and emotions to understand. Our personalities are individual and unique and different, and every one of us has a different set of fears and worries that we need to overcome. But what would have happened if someone could have stopped the bullying? What would have happened? And let's not blame the children. Our children are imitating us. They're imitating what they see among our leaders. You know as well as I do that right now, name-calling, insulting, derogatory comments, making fun of somebody with a disability, calling a woman a dog is no longer inappropriate. It's an election strategy, and it works. There's flat out too much meanness in our country. Too much. It's time. It's time for the church to step into the fray. It's time for the church to declare again and again until we lose our voices, but not our hearts, the undying, ongoing love of God. It's time. In the article, What Do We Do Now? The author of that Christian Science Monitor piece says that there is a way out of despair. It begins in love, yes, he says, but there's also many common sense gun laws that the overwhelming majority of Americans are in favor of, Republican or Democrat. The overwhelming majority. He points out 86% of Americans support universal background checks. 85% support banning gun sales to stalkers. 76% support mandatory safe storage in homes. My friend Buck is a member of this church. Buck's a hunter. I suspect he's a good one. Every gun he owns, when it's done, is locked up safe, away. My brother-in-law Steve is a friend of mine. He lives in Oregon. He's a retired farmer. Steve's a very good hunter. He feeds his family, his grandchildren, from the results of what he hunts. Every single gun he has, when it's not in use, it is locked up safe. 76% of Americans support this. Go read the article by Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times that was first published in 2017. He lists 12 common sense gun laws that at the lowest are supported by 52%. The one at the top is over 90%. We can do this, my friends. We can pass these laws if we can get around some of the obstacles that are there. This article in the Christian Science Monitor, it says that the problem is there are well-organized and energized voices from the minority, like the NRA, that are able to shut down the disorganized majority and what they believe. We have to start with loving our neighbor. We have to start with working on this problem. We can no longer wait. We have to organize now. We have to fight now. We have to roll up our sleeves and get after the task of ending the scourge, the disgusting, violent scourge of gun violence. We have the resources in this church to participate in this. We can. I know it feels hard. And it's easy to go home and turn on the television, watch a ball game. But we can't do that anymore. We found in the United States of America, we found that we can do hard things. We've found that when there's a crisis, when there's something before us that we've never encountered before, we know how to work together to find a way where there's no way, to do whatever it takes to save lives. One of my favorite movies is Apollo 13. It tells the true story of the Apollo mission to the moon, Apollo 13. When on their way, an oxygen tank explodes. We see some rather frightening scenes of the capsule itself, and then we go back to Houston to Mission Control, where Gene Kranz, who's the flight director, who's played by Ed Harris in the movie, he gathers all of his engineers in a small, cramped room and says, all right, what have we got? What are we going to do? How do we get them back? What kind of angle do I need to take on reentry? And one of the engineers says, we don't need to talk about reentry. There's not enough power in the capsule to get even halfway back to the Earth. They're going to die. We need more power. There starts up an argument, and they start shouting back and forth at each other. No, you're wrong. No, this not. We got to do this. And finally, Kranz says, stop. Listen. We're going to bring those men home safe. We need to find a way to get more power in that capsule. Call every single engineer around the country, around the world, who designed every single switch, every flip, every single piece of that capsule. Find power. We've got to bring them back. We've got to bring those men back alive. That's our only option. Failure, he said. Failure is not an option. We've got to sit down together. We've got to find every resource. My friends, in this church, I know, we're just one church. We're just one community of faith. But we have resources in this congregation. We have leaders. We have politicians. We have people who have connections. We have ways that we can work to end this violence. We can do it. I believe in this church. I believe in you. I believe in God. I trust Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and I know that we can do that here. And my friends, failure is not an option.